titled The Power of Dialogue to Build Community. The event, I'll say it again, is The Power of Dialogue to Build Community. For those of you who may be new to ACIC's work, we are a coalition of individuals, organizations, and institutions working in the Atlantic region to build and model just, equitable, and sustainable communities, both locally and globally. We also represent and amplify the voice of Atlantic Canada and connect the Atlantic region with other provincial, national, and international stakeholders. ACIC is a rich and vibrant coalition with over 50 members in the Atlantic provinces, united by our strong commitment to building a better world. I would like to start off by acknowledging that ACIC is located in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. I'm joining this event from Chibuktuk, or Halifax in English, and I'd like to take this time to invite you to add the land that you are in the chat box, if you know it. As we settle into the event, we invite you to use the chat box to introduce yourself, and a reminder that we ask for respectful and inclusive language in all communications and interactions in the chat. ACIC stands for respect, inclusion, equity, safety, and solidarity. And while we appreciate and value diverse perspectives, we invite you all to share these perspectives respectfully and kindly with one another. This year marks the 34th anniversary of International Development Week, a national initiative that aims to inform, inspire, and involve Canadians in Canada's international development efforts. This year's IDW theme, Building a Better World Together, is a blueprint for a peaceful, inclusive, and prosperous world for all. IDW is a time to strengthen collaborative efforts and tackle local and global challenges. And as we've learned in events and activities that have taken place throughout this week already, tackling local and global challenges can look a number of different ways. This past Wednesday, ACIC, along with member organization Connecting to Africa, hosted a film screening and panel discussion titled A Journey into the Unknown, which explored the impact of trans-Mediterranean migration. The evening began with a screening of the powerful BBC Africa documentary, Dark Waters, Africa's Deadliest Migration Route, followed by an engaging presentation from Mr. Bright Fiaga, International Counselor for Immigration, Entrepreneurship, and Employment, and a panel discussion featuring legal and academic experts who spoke about the migration experience through a social justice lens, highlighting the tragic consequences of illegal migration while exploring pathways for action in local and global communities. Earlier today, ACIC member Coady Institute hosted a virtual coffee house titled Challenging Hegemony and Development, a facilitated dialogue on peace and conflict transformation. This event featured 6 Pathy Foundation Fellows who are currently midway through their fellowship years, completing their social change initiatives in Morocco, Indonesia, South Africa, Guatemala, Ontario, Quebec, and Alberta. The fellows spoke about how climate emergency, unjust economic order, and deeply polarized political discourse are presenting challenges and redefining what development should be to foster a sustainable future for the planet and humanity. These are just a few examples of events from throughout this International Development Week, and there's been an incredible slate of activities and campaigns since the start of IDW. As we come to the end of the week, we shift our attention to yet another way to address challenges and implement change both locally and globally, which is through peace building. Today's event, The Power of Dialogue to Build Community, will be moderated by Susan Hartley, the editor of a new anthology on peace building titled Global Voices for Peace. Today, our esteemed panel of speakers and contributors to this anthology will share their perspectives on dialogue as a tool to build peace, connection, and understanding in the face of division or conflict, and talk about how we can build and strengthen resilient communities through storytelling and listening. I'll now hand things over to our moderator for today's event, Susan Hartley. Susan is a Rotary Peace Fellow, clinical psychologist, and an advocate for promotion of population wellness through addressing the social determinants of health. She has extensive experience in gender rights and anti-poverty activism, and is a longtime volunteer with not-for-profit organizations that address human rights and gender-based structural and cultural violence locally and globally. She established the Atlantic chapter of Right to Learn Afghanistan in 2009, and she lives in Prince Edward Island. Over to you, Susan.
Thank you so much, Leanne, and welcome to everybody that's here. I'm really grateful to be part of this slate of amazing offerings this International Development Week that Leanne just outlined. So I hope everybody's had a chance to take them in. So about a year ago, I began this project that she mentioned, Global Voices for Peace, which is an introduction to peace builders and the hope that they bring. And since last April, when I started this journey, I've had 103 peace builders join me on that journey. And that journey was started with some questions that I asked them. I asked peace builders to reflect on what needs to happen for humanity to find a way toward peace in our world, and what actions do we need to take to move forward. So all of the responses were incredibly insightful and inspirational. And today I've invited 4 of those contributors to Global Voices for Peace to join me on this panel and to speak about the power of dialogue, storytelling, and listening deeply to transform relationships and society. So I'd like to introduce them before I start with some questions that I'd like to share with them and with you. So to my immediately, I don't know, this way, is Kieran Singh Sarah. He's an award-winning storytelling artist and folklorist who brings storytelling to his work in peace and in the establishment of peace and human rights initiatives in numerous countries. You can find more extensive bios on all of these people on the website, so I'm not going to take too much time in repeating them here. And to his, what's that, left, is Grace Van Zyl, who is, and Kieran joins us from Tennessee in the United States. And Grace is joining us from Johannesburg, South Africa. She is the chair of the Rotary Action Group for Peace and brings Rotarians from all over the world together to incorporate peace building into their humanitarian projects. And Grace grew up, and I think she will speak more about it, grew up in an apartheid South Africa and lives in a post-apartheid South Africa. And directly below me on my screen is Nabil Ouda, and Nabil taught many of us in dialogue at the Rotary Peace Center in Chulalongkorn University in Bangkok, and is a Palestinian growing up in Israel. He spent most of his lifetime utilizing dialogue and teaching others to utilize dialogue to build greater understanding between peoples. And he's currently in Ottawa, Canada. And Joe Barry, to his left, joins us from the UK. And Joe founded Building Bridges for Peace 24 years ago in 2009. So almost 26 years ago, Joe, after her father was killed in a terrorist attack. She reached out to the man who killed him with empathy and compassion and a desire to understand. And since then, together, they have empowered people to become change makers through reconciliation and dialogue. So that's our esteemed panel, and I am so grateful to them for joining me on the journey. And I'm going to now turn to the panel, and how we're going to work this is I have a few questions I'm going to ask them, and I'm going to ask them to respond in around our virtual table, and take about 5 minutes for each question, and that will leave us some time for Q&A from the audience. So if you have questions popping up from the audience, please put them in the chat. We have somebody monitoring the chat, and make sure that your mics are muted so we don't get that interference would be great. So I'd like to start with asking each of you how you came to this work, whether that be the work of storytelling, of facilitating dialogue, of transforming relationships through dialogue, providing space for that kind of dialogue, how you came to this work. And I'm going to start because, Kieran, you're on my left. I'm going to start with you, and we'll go around the circle in the way that I introduced everybody.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Hartley. And greetings, everybody, from East Tennessee, the Appalachian Mountains, as I like to say, in the U.S. South. Namaste, y'all. So how I came to this work, well, obviously you can tell by my accent, I'm not originally from Appalachia, United States. I grew up in England, born in 1976, the summer 1976, in a small coastal town. And I come from people, my parents, that came to Britain as political refugees in 1972 from Idi Amin's dictatorship in Uganda. And so they had to flee. And when they arrived in Britain with just the shirts on their back and They arrived and the neo-Nazis stormed the airport. They basically hitchhiked from the airport and found a small town. And 4 years later, I was born. So when I think about, and today I work obviously in storytelling and lead multiple sort of storytelling initiatives in social justice work, peace building. And people ask me often, like, what's your methodology? What's your strategies? And it's not a PowerPoint. It's not a toolkit. It's not a Gantt chart. It's my mother. My mother is my methodology. What my mother did when I was a kid was that she used to invite refugees, the garbage truck men, neighbors, the entire jury service, teachers, educators, even though that they were facing these sort of challenges from neo-Nazis, she invited them into warmth and kindness. She made food for them. She made tea. And that ritual from a tiny little kitchen in a small house on a cul-de-sac street in South England, what she was doing is cultivating joy. She was creating a communal storytelling space for people. And I realized later is that what she was actually doing came from a Sikh tradition of dismantling historical inequality by breaking down the caste system, right? One story at a time, one event at a time. So that idea has really been sort of my thinking as a folklorist, as an artist, as a practitioner, in thinking about how I come to this work is I see that as an art form, the bringing together of people. And that has led me to really take that and to work in places like Northern Ireland, in the west of Scotland, on gang reconciliation, multiple different projects, and eventually to the United States. And I kind of see it as a transportable art that can be applied in multiple spaces. So this living room right here is where I can bring people together to talk about refugee justice, LGBTQ justice. When we're trying to address anti-immigrant policies, we bring communities together, I make tea, and we talk, and we bring out the stories about our values, who we are, our connections, what do we envision for the world beyond the trauma of crisis, and then how we can use stories to manifest that, to create that, and to turn from imagination into reality. So that's how I come to this work. And it's really, I honor my parents and I honor my ancestors for teaching me this art and tool.
Thank you, Karen, very much. And I'll pass it on to Grace.
Thank you, Susan. I think my journey to come to where I am at now started in very, very early stages of my life, growing up in South Africa, in apartheid South Africa, and being on the privileged side, if you want to call it that, and not understanding why things were happening, not understanding why there was segregation and why there were toilets for certain people and why you couldn't go to this park or that park and why at a certain time in the evening the sirens would sound and Black people would have to be off the street. I didn't understand that, and I grew up with this. And going through that whole process, understanding the pain, not understanding it actually, seeing the pain, seeing the conflict with certain people. And my apologies, I do have dogs barking. I'm going to try and get someone to quieten them down, but this is all about peace, isn't it? So not understanding all these things that happened in the society where I grew up in, because to me, you grew up and white people had to go to this space and Black people had to go to that space. And I just couldn't understand why there were differences. But it was only after I joined Rotary that I really, really started to understand the other side. Growing up in a privileged environment, growing up as a white person in South Africa, obviously it was alien to me. So I joined Rotary and I was exposed to this community in an area where there was 70% unemployment. So big mining towns in our country, the mines had closed down, and I was involved in a community where there was 70% unemployment. The men were told to, the men didn't have a job anymore. women in most of our communities are very discriminated against still today. They don't have the rights that the men do. And these women were left to put food on the table, to raise their families, to educate their children. And the men either left and went elsewhere, or became alcoholics, or just sat at home and did nothing. So I was asked to present some financial planning or financial savvy tips to this community, and that's my vocation. I'm a financial advisor, and I went in there with my knowledge, my background, and saying, well, you should save, and this is how easy it is to save, and this is what you should be doing. And it was only then that I realized that my reality was so different to the reality of the people in those communities. For example, I would say to them, well, it's easy, you're earning money, just save, and just go and, instead of spending it on this, save for your children's education, don't spend all the money at Christmas and those kind of things. That one woman said to me, you know what, I came home from my first paycheck or my first stipend from doing the work I do in this empowerment group. And I was so excited to tell my husband that we had some money. And he forced me to go to the ATM, and he took my card and he drew all my money. And then when I got home, he beat me, because how can an uneducated woman that is supposed to be looking after my family earn this kind of money? You must be selling your services in a different way. And it was only then that I realized that our stories are so different, and that we had to really have an understanding of where the other person comes from, and not judge them and not put our personal experiences on them. And I'm so grateful for the opportunity to have been exposed to this kind of thing, because it's really opened my mind and really put me in a position where peace building is at the forefront. It's not about anything else. It's about creating those safe spaces. And I'm so fortunate to be in an organization and surrounded by people like are on the screen that share similar stories or different stories, because everyone's story is different. And you know what? Everyone has a story to tell, and we need to respect that. So that is how I came into where I am now.
Thank you, Grace. Nabil.
Thank you, Susan. And thank you all for being here. I was just heartened just to listen so far. I'm all what I'm going to say ditto and move on, because it's, I always say to people, I have come to this work honestly. I grew up in a conflictual context, like other people, and mine, it felt like, as a growing up, it was all level, at the familial, community, at the national, at the regional level. Like every part of our lives had major conflicts that we need to actually deal with, respond to. And the question you asked, what got us in, got me into this, and it started off, and I've talked some more about the professional side of it, but on a personal level, I grew up in a community that there were clear delineation between who's who and what is what, and I was actually told, we don't talk to those people. And even as a child, I was like, why in the world shouldn't we talk to these people? And it was very intriguing to me. My mother kept telling me I was a very inquisitive child. So I would actually go around, there's no exaggeration, and visit these families, and just to see, are they bad people? Are they horrible people? Why can't we talk to them? And you start realizing by just sitting and breaking bread with them. And I was a child. I was a kid, literally a young kid. I would walk to their homes, and they were in shock. They were welcoming. They were loving. They were caring, and they were like, and not one shunned me. And I'm thinking, why my family think these people are horrible people? There's something wrong about this. And you start realizing there's lots of stories made up over time that grow and grow and grow. And with no communication and no engagement and no dialogue, they become what we call gospel. They become like, this is the way we are. And I always marveled, Kiran talked about his mother. My maternal grandmother, her name was Nijma, which means star. And the woman was a star, no exaggeration. Like, so she was the kind of person, she would embrace people, bring people, as I said, the garbage man, the laborer, all of this, and bring them home, take care of them, give them opportunity to wash themselves, to eat, and all of this. And I commit to you, I have never heard one bad word about my grandmother from anyone. And I said, I want to be like her. How can you have that sense of presence, that sense of being, that people are not judging you? But I think it's that the power of embrace and the power of accepting people for who they are and what they are. So it started that whole process, and then took it to my community. And outside of my immediate thing, now we're living, I grew up in a village that became part of a city. You know how this urban sprawl grows? It was really a village, very closed village with lots of, people who knew each other, and the city around us grew and we became a suburb. And then we got introduced now to a whole different element. I'm Palestinian, I'm Arab, and now we have to deal more with the Jewish community. And again, this is no judgment on any religion, so please don't take it that way. Haifa, where I grew up, has no holy significance to any of the major religions except for the Baha'is. I'm not advocating for the Baha'is. I'm just simply saying, and the Baha'is believed in gardens and flowers and getting along and all of this. So it had really an impact on the city, that people were there's more sense of dialogue. And I really took that to heart. And one thing that became very clear to me, though, early on, that peace building dialogue is difficult. So many of us have this ideal sense of, oh, we come together, group hugs happen. It did not happen for me at all. And I think I learned so much about and I'll share some more. I will talk about it's 80% preparation and 20% execution. Like, you have to make sure you provide the right, safe context for this, for people to really feel engaged. And I think that's my grandmother provided for people, a safe space. You have a safe space, people can be themselves, and they have less need to project and attack and defend, but they rather talk about their own stories. And then from there, I just don't want to take too much time, but just, as a youngster, became very involved with the community outside of Jerusalem that brought actually Christian, Jews, and Muslims who were religious, it's a whole different ballgame. But the amazing thing about dialogue with them is they found way more commonalities. And I know it's a kind of a generic, we say things. There was so much in common between them in terms of values, in terms of principles, in terms of family importance, in terms of their divine and their connection to the divine, that was so powerful they have never seen that in the other. And that got me hooked. And 50 years later, I'm still doing it. Thank you.
I forgot to unmute. Thank you, Nabil. I think a lot of what you said leads very well into Joe's experience. And so, Joe, I welcome you to respond.
Thank you. So wonderful to be here with you all. So my beginnings happened 40 years ago when my father was blown up. And for the first time in my life, I knew I had an enemy. It was the IRA who planted the bomb. And the moment I realized I had an enemy, I made a decision I didn't want an enemy. I wanted to find a way to understand those who killed my dad. And back in 1984, it wasn't possible to understand the IRA motives from the newspaper because they were completely dehumanized. But I made this decision. I'm going to bring something positive out of this. I'm going to understand those who killed my father. And it was been an extraordinary journey. And after we had the peace process, I'd done quite a lot of preparation inside myself of managing my own trauma and anger and blame response. And I started meeting men who were part of the IRA. And that was my preparation to actually meet the man who killed my dad. He came out of prison early because of the peace process. And I went to see him on my own. I now practice restorative justice. This breaks all the rules. There was no one with me. There was no one to facilitate it. But I was determined, and no one wanted to support us at that time. But I wanted to see him, not to tell him that he was a bad man, not to get an apology, but to look into his eyes and see his humanity, because that would restore something the bomb had taken away from me. No one knew I was doing this. It was a personal thing. And I thought I'd go once to see him, and then I wouldn't see him again, and no one would know. And he arrived, as I knew he would, with the mindset of this was a political decision. We had to do it. There was no other way. My father was a politician, and so my father was obstructing the safety and the peace and the political power that they wanted. And so for him, it was a strategy that worked. It was something that he was proud of. And he started off by giving me a lot of the justification. And I listened to him. I listened to him in a way that made it safe for him to open up. I was completely present to him. And as I'm listening to him, I'm also listening to myself. And the parts of me that are finding it difficult, I was letting them go, so I could carry on with my heart absolutely open to him. And I reached a point of really seeing his humanity, seeing how much he cared. And when I saw that, I thought, okay, I can go. No one will ever know I've done this, and I don't ever have to see him again, because it is actually hard hearing him justify killing my father's strategy, because to me it's not a strategy. It's still a deep wound I'm healing. This was in 2000. And that's when he changed, and he would say that he was disarmed by my empathy. And if I'd gone in there going, I'm right, you're wrong, arguing history, he would have stayed in a very safe place of justification. And he said to me, I don't know who I am anymore. He was vulnerable. Can I hear your pain? Can I hear your anger? What can I do for you? And it started a very different conversation where he was now rehumanizing my dad. And he would say that he was dehumanized, which is true, but now that he was also guilty of dehumanizing the other. That's what happens in conflict. But through our dialogue and our story, we were rehumanizing. My dad came back in between us as someone who Patrick could now respect and see him as a man with a soul. And the conversation was very different after that. And we've been meeting for 24 years, and we've become friends. And I'm more than him and me. I do a lot on my own, but the basis of everything I do is what I've learned from my dialogue with Patrick McGee. And it's not easy. It's still difficult. It is emotional work, but actually I'm so grateful for what it's taught me, because things I've learned as a human being, as a peace builder, who I want to see humanity of everyone in the world, but that requires me constantly checking the parts of me that still want to judge and still want to blame, still want to make people wrong, can still get self-righteous. So he's been a teacher for me. And I really admire his strength to carry on meeting me, because I actually think it's harder for him to meet me than me to meet him. I think to come back from having committed violence, having taken life, is really hard, and the cost to his own humanity. I'm someone who believes totally in human beings, that sees the humanity in everyone. And yes, preparation is massively important. And looking back on that first meeting, I did actually have a huge amount of preparation, and I facilitated him feeling safe to open up. And that safety to me is so important. Thank you. I'll end it there.
Thank you, Joe. Everybody is got so many powerful things to communicate, and you know, it strikes me as you're all talking, there's common threads around safety and humanity, and opening the doors for those things to happen, whether you're opening the doors to your neighbor's house to check to see if they're the monsters that you've been told they are, or whether you're going in and working with somebody and really hearing them, or whether you are learning from others, or whether you're just saying, I need to do this because I have no other choice. So thank you. I wanted to reflect on something Nabil said about stories that we're told that are inaccurate and end up becoming gospel. And, you know, we live in a society now where we're surrounded by those things, and we're hearing them all the time. And it's a very sacred, I think, Karen used that word, very sacred and honored thing to carry people's stories and to be allowed into that space. So I'm wondering if you can reflect on, you know, what are the principles or the considerations that are really important to take if we're going to, you know, Nabil mentioned preparation, 80% preparation. What are the things we need to keep in mind when we are engaging people in dialogue so that we honor both the teller of the story, the listener of the story itself, and the ancestral roots that those stories come from? So are you okay if we go the same order around the panel table?
Yeah.
All right, so if you could reflect on that, the things sort of we need to keep in mind in this, at this time where we hear so many things that are spoken as gospel that are inaccurate. Thank you.
Absolutely. No, I mean, I think what we've heard is, I see the threads too, and the threads of providing safe space and seeing someone's soul, valuing everybody you work with as teachers and what you can learn from your experiences. I think one of the principles that you know, and I came a Rotary Peace Fellow, and I focused on storytelling and international development, and through my ethnographic work, particularly working to collect stories from people that are unhoused or living through transition, I came to a sort of conclusion that was something in that research work that said, where sociologists were saying that people that are homeless or unhoused tell fictional stories. And I thought, there's no such thing as a fictional story. And that's one of the things when you go into this work, is to remember that there's no such thing as a fictive narrative if the story holds truth for the teller. And what I mean by that also is that if it holds meaning, if it holds value. Now, for example, if you're sitting with someone and they're telling, say, the world was made in 7 days, I'm not going to say there's not truth in that if that holds meaning to you. I don't believe the world was made in 7 days factually, but if that is the kind of narrative that you grew up with, and if I go with the intention to shift how you think, then I shouldn't be at that kitchen table. I shouldn't be there. But if I go with the intention to understand your soul, who you are, where you come from, your humanity, then there's truth in that story. And I think when we go with that kind of idea that the people you work with will always be your greatest teachers, that there's something in the presence of others that transcends any social construct, nationality, religion, state, country, religion, or any of these. They transcend that. They help us to get to that kind of deeper understanding, the connection of what binds us as humans, our humanity, our essence. So I think these are very important, but I think something else to keep in mind in the principles of this work is that, and I refer to storytelling, is to break it down from all the theory, it's the Jedi Force, right? It's the Jedi Force. If you're a Star Wars fanatic, like I am, the Jedi Force can be used both for good and bad. It's a powerful force. It's the most powerful force on this universe, right? In this, really, if you think about it, it's like the powerful force in the universe is the powerful thought. but the powerful ways to communicate that is through story. It can be used for bad and good. It can take us to war, but it can also prevent us from war. It can divide a nation. It can tell a whole group of people that they are criminals, right? It can transform the way that if you're brought up with values of loving your neighbor, then the narrative can be so powerful that we end up like going to our neighbor with suspicion when we should really be going to our neighbor with love. Okay, so it's very important to be mindful of the narratives that are influencing us every day, how we think and how we think of others. And so when I go into that work, I believe it's really important to get to the core values of who we are. And when you're in that process of facilitation, don't just start with the strategy or the action. Go into the home, the place, your mother, your father, your upbringing, what informed you to become the person you are, and what keeps you up at night, right? What is the world that you're trying to create? And I think these are kind of things. And I think everyone touched on this. It's really important to create, one of the most important things in storytelling is to create a safe space where people can talk about issues, topics, politics, whatever it is, in a safe way. They can talk about identity. And I did a piece of storytelling work recently. A white man got up and said, I'm not sure what my place is in society now. And I said, you know what, thank you for doing that, because you're expressing something that's difficult to talk about. So let's talk about it. And he felt safe enough, vulnerable enough to bring that up. Not on social media. This is in-person work. That's why I say this is sacred work. Right? It's a very, very sacred work. And I think it's very important as practitioners, we need to prevent as much as possible the corporations and the politicians from extracting something that is very sacred to our humanity. We need to protect it. Really much we need to protect it. And that's what brings us together. We have so much, our humanity is connected. Actually, all sentient life is connected. And these constructs it divides us, but we can transform those constructs. We can dismantle the constructs to realize the beauty of oneness, but also the uniqueness of our unique traditions as well that can be celebrated. Thank you.
Thank you. And Grace.
Thank you, Susan. Kiran, and I think I'm going to follow on to some of what you said, and you've said a lot of what I wanted to cover as well. But I think in the previous question, I alluded to growing up in a South Africa where there were two parts, the one that was privileged and the one that was, the apartheid was against, and I realized that my reality is not everyone's reality. And I think that's the starting point, to understand that there are differences, to understand that everybody sees things differently, they experience differently, and their circumstances are very different. So one of the things that I often harp on is radical listening, because we are all human. And we'll be in a conversation and somebody will be speaking to us and we're already formulating our answer. How are we going to respond to this? Instead of actually listening to understand, instead of listening to those, especially those that are feeling victimized and marginalized. So radical listening and really listening to understand where that person is coming from, rather than to just respond, I think is one of the principles that I still every day try and improve on, because we are all human. We're not perfect, and we all have good days and we all have bad days. And I just think that sometimes it is very, very important to actually think before you speak. Then also being more curious about being judgmental. And I'm going to give you an example. So I'm involved in a project where we mentor some students from previously disadvantaged backgrounds, and we pay for their studies and we mentor them and we try and uncover the challenges that they have that they are not achieving to the point they should achieve. And I had this one student and he was, I'd call him 17 years old, so the year before he finishes school, his marks suddenly dropped for no reason. There was no reason. It wasn't that he wasn't going to school, he wasn't putting less effort in, but he was dealing with the stress factor of a tradition in our country. So just to give you some background, in South Africa, we have 12 official languages. And each one of those languages comes with its own culture. Now, in this particular culture, at the age of 16 or 17, they would send the young boy off to the bush, and this young boy then becomes a man. And part of becoming a man is that they would be circumcised in the bush with no medical treatment. We have a lot of deaths and a lot of cases where there's really severe complications because of this tradition. And this young boy was so stressed about this. And my first reaction is, what an inhumane practice. But I didn't understand it. And I had to ask the questions, and I had to understand the culture and not come in judgmental, because that wasn't going to help my student get over his stress. So being curious rather than judgmental, I think, is one of the things that we all should implore. We need to build safety and trust. We need to be able to have dialogue with people that they actually trust, that we actually believe in what they're doing and understand what they're doing, and that we are not just going to go and say, well, I really don't believe that practice or that culture, so I'm not accepting it. So I think being open and creating that trust, exactly with that example that I gave you, is to understand that they have a different point of view. Another example, the community that I was speaking about earlier, where I was giving financial advice, a lot of these women are sitting in a position where the husbands have left their homes and they are now left to fend for their family. And I'm not sure how it works in different countries, but in this country, we have something called child support. But these women do not know that they actually qualify for that child support. They do not know that they can go to the courts and say, I have these children and the father of these children have just upped and left, and I'm left to support. So understanding that culture and guiding them in a way that it's not disrespectful to their culture, but it's also understanding that you have rights and understanding that you have a voice without disrespecting their belief system and their culture. So ethical storytelling is also really, really important. So I could have come onto this platform and told you everything about my experience as a white South African in my country, and how I didn't, or how I believed in apartheid, or how I didn't believe in apartheid. But if I didn't understand the other side of the coin, and I didn't tell you that story, it is not ethical. So a lot of times there's storytelling, but only extracts of what we believe is important is told. We are not telling the full story. We are not giving credibility to that person's feelings or to that person's circumstances or what they actually experienced. We are all different, and we need to understand those differences. And having respect and telling that story in an ethical and truthful way from different perspectives, not just our own perspective, I think paves the way of having a conversation where you can have more open dialogue and trust, and facilitate a process where peace building is possible. So thank you very much, Susan.
And thank you, Grace. So Nabil, I quoted you about gospel and inaccurate stories. So I'm really curious, as Grace says is important to be, about how we protect against that, and how in our own practices we ensure that, as Grace says, it's ethical and respectful.
One of my earliest lessons that I got is dialogue is not a debate. And in my eagerness to get into this in my younger years, and my job is to tell you the story, but really was to convince you of the rightness of my cause, of the rightness of my story. And that really flew in my face, big time. Like, I mean, because, and it became a competition. Whose story is more authentic? Whose story is more truer to reality? And I think for me, it came at the end of the day. Somebody told me, Nabil, share your story. No one can take it away from you. Share your story. No one can take it away from you. And that stuck with me for a long, long time. I'm not here to convince you of anything. I'm not here to even change your mind. I just need you to listen to my lived experience. And that's a key element, my lived experience, my joy, my pain, my story, all of, and I think the more I'm authentic, this is a key word, we talk about safety, but authenticity. The more authentic you are, it doesn't matter if that person came into the room hating you and judging you. The process itself transforms. And this is what we have to trust in this. It's not a result, it's the process itself. And it may not be happen overnight in one day, but the idea that I had an impact on somebody, but mostly that I came in with that, with the intention of just simply, here's the thing, humanizing me to the other and me and them to me. I can tell you stories upon stories of people who are dealt with neo-Nazis and skinheads and radical groups and all of that. The minute we humanize one to the other, I call it an edge is broken. Just that edge of like jumping to conclusion or go to the attack gets subsides in ways you have to be in it to see it. And I think it's that coming with that genuineness and hearing the stories that everybody shared. It's I think humanizing one to the other. But we need to do that not in the big stuff, even in the small stuff. How we deal with people who are in trouble, with people who are not, as not on the straight and narrow, as we say. Do we do that? Do we accept their humanity? Do we actually not go into judgment? And I think to me, this is so foundational. And I've always, after all these years of this, there's a responsibility on both sides to ensure the kind of the honesty of this. It's not only on the speaker but on the receiver. You said ask what about the receiver has to come with at least an open mind and open heart. And I'm not telling you have to agree with the other side, but you cannot come in shut off completely and just simply the person is speaking to a wall. So we spend lots of time in preparing people. What does that look like? What does that mean to you? How do you do it? And I think people start opening up. There's actually, dialogue has an educational component to it. And I always tell people, we help people unlearn patterns, not learn new ones, just unlearn the patterns that they come in with, which is we're all about. I mean, as humans, we're all about judgment. We like to judge things and assess them and give you an answer right away. So after all of this, I want to just leave you with something really critical for me that has worked for me. And actually, I'm finishing a book on this, but it's actually, and the mantra is this: listen, think, act. Please do not do the reverse. Listen to self, listen to your own story, your own reality, not to the world yet. Everybody says, oh, listen to your parents, listen to your teachers. No. Listen to self. Listen to yourself. Listen to to your own story. And then listen to others and the context. Then reflect and think about, what does this mean? And then open your mouth. I think, unfortunately for us as humans, we turn to the reverse. and something happened, we react to it, and they go, oh, maybe I should have thought about it. Oh, maybe I should have spoken to Kieran before I actually said something to him. And I think this is, to me, is a concrete. It's a good guide for in dialogue, in dealing with each other. Just listen, think, act. Listen. I keep telling myself all the time, and people call me on it. My own kids call me on it. Dad, you said listen, think, act. You're just jumping to conclusion too fast. And it's wonderful. But I think, to me, this is a key element. If we can do that, but do not miss. And I'll finish with this. I always say to people, there's many times there's one set of facts, but there are many truths. So we should not confuse facts for truth. And what Kieran shared was very powerful, but really it is that. It's your truth, that, and we can't just judge the truth. It's this. No, that's your truth. You want 7 days, 7 days. And I think it's half a minute. Good for you. The issue, though, is you can argue with that, but the thing is, what does that mean to you? What meaning does it bring to your life? And can we connect on that? Can we connect that there's actually maybe some sort of a creation, whatever, how it happened, that we need to take care of, regardless of how we think of how it came to be, and I think that can be very, very powerful. Thank you.
You're reminding me of your class at Chulalongkorn, where you asked us to dialogue and I started to debate. I learned a lot. Thank you. And Joe?
Well, I'm just so inspired by everyone. Thank you. I have found it very easy to want to listen to one side more than another side, and feel that one side's more right and one story is more valid. And so I've been learning over the decades to let go of my need to feel that one side has a sense of being more virtuous. And I remember one day sitting in Belfast, and in the room was Patrick McGee, who killed my father. There was an ex-British soldier there. There was someone from the loyalist Protestant community there, also an ex-combatant. And I was hearing all their stories, and they were talking about the same events, but from a completely different perspective. And I just had this moment of realization with hearing each side, that they all had such a valid truth. They all had their own story, which was true for them. And if I could listen with my heart, which I did that day, I reached a point of really seeing that there are no sides. There are human beings grasping with difficult situations which they'd all come from, dealing with trauma, dealing with conflict, and all doing their best. And in my brain just went quiet, and my heart took over of just understanding that empathy. I call it unbounded empathy with people from different sides. And as human beings, I believe we can hold different truths about the same event. Mm-hmm. And we can hold that we all are valid, and then there are no sides. There's just all of us doing our best. And I remember going to Israel and Palestine with Patrick McGee probably about 12 years ago. And we went to our first group. We met, they'd invite us to come to share our stories, and it was Combatants for Peace Extraordinary Group, but also did some work with Parents Circle, Family Forum, another amazing group. And as people were arriving, I looked at the Palestinians, and they were all late because they'd all had to go through so many challenges at checkpoints, and they arrived all agitated, and then the Israelis were agitated. And I remember thinking, what am I doing here, sharing my story? I live in peacetime now. Yeah, I had one event happen to me, but I am privileged. Why am I here? But I somehow trusted that I was there for a reason, and I carried on sharing with Patrick. And when we stopped speaking, one of them said, what you've done is you've allowed us to see our conflict mirrored back in a different way. Mm-hmm. And we can now have a different conversation. Mm-hmm. And I just felt settled and like, okay, I can just now just be present. And then it wasn't about my story at all. It was about their stories. And that was an absolute privilege. And I remember another part of the story when I was facilitating in Cyprus, a circle. And it was after a couple of days of us working together. And we had young people who were Turkish, who were Greek, who all different backgrounds, who would not have met each other before. People that represented their other. And the first round of the circle, so many young people talked about the death, the killing of their grandparents, whether they were Turkish Cypriots or Greek Cypriots. And I could feel the emotion in the room, and I carried on, and there was some tears, it was genuine emotion there. And the third round, someone said she was a Greek Cypriot. Now I've heard your stories. I pledge to cross the border and go to a beach in the Turkish part of Cyprus. Now, she wouldn't have gone before then. And no one told her, you have to reconcile. She felt it. Stories give us the possibility of feeling that change because we want to, because we can't tell people they have to change. We can't do things to people. This is with people, creating that safe space. I'll never forget her words. And then a lot of the other young people said, and we'll join you and we'll have a picnic. Now, you might just think crossing a border for a beach and a picnic is small, but to me, that's what it's about. And that's the power of stories. Thank you.
Oh my, this is lovely. You're all so powerful. I came across again a quote from Desmond Tutu that I shared with some of the people on this panel the other day. All of our humanity is dependent on recognizing the humanity in others. And that's what I'm hearing throughout what you're saying. And the other thing that is going through my mind is John Paul Lederach, and he most recently has put out some short writings just about how do we deal with what's going on in his country and the world. And he's the one that introduced the transformation of relationships as the way to build peace. And that's what we're all talking about, right? Through curiosity, through authenticity, through providing safe space, through opening those doors, through that real curiosity about not only what the other person believes and thinks, but what we're thinking. Why did I have that thought? Why did I have that reaction? Where is this belief system coming from? And what are I think Kieran mentioned the values that people hold dear that they're reacting from, that they're defending, you know. So I had another question, but I'm not going to ask you because you've all touched on it. And that was just what experiences you've had that tell you what is transformative about storytelling and peace building. And I noticed that in the chat that people are just listening so intently with curiosity. But I want to open it up to questions. I'm going to open it up first to the four of you for any questions you have for each other based on what you've heard each other speaking. And then I'm going to invite the audience to put their questions in the chat. So I'm opening the floor.
I don't know if I've got a kind of a statement or I am really moved by the personal experiences of what's been shared. And I think it really touches on this idea of paying attention and, you know, and I want to a little bit up front, you know, I think peace building isn't necessarily this sort of 60s, 70s thing. It's justice work too. And that might be some of the work that Peace Fellows do in defining and pushing the notion of peace. I kind of think, you know, my question might be too much, but think it's a little bit about kind of like privilege as well. Thinking about in this work that we're doing, I think Grace, you sort of touched on it, and Libby, you touched on it. It's like Joe touched on it. It's like, whose stories aren't we hearing? Do you know what I mean? And, you know, we have these spaces where we're able to do this work, but in your experiences, what are the stories that really need to be elevated? And I know it's this is a truly democratic art form. It belongs to anyone. What we're seeing in the United States right now, which is very frightening, is the dismantling of marginalized stories and diversity, which is, I believe, as our strength. But in our experiences, in your experiences, whose stories aren't we listening to in this world? What needs to be elevated? What's the place of accountability in storytelling?
If I may comment on that, Kiran, so if we knew whose stories weren't being heard, we would be a lot more knowledgeable than what we are now, So as peace builders, we are trying to elevate those stories of the marginalized communities. So there are so many stories that we as peace builders don't even know. There are so many things that we cannot comprehend because it's not our reality, and we haven't been exposed to that reality. What's happening in America is very alien to some other parts of the world. In South Africa, it's probably not as alien because we've gone through that. But in some parts of the world, it's like you're watching this and you think it's a horror story you're watching on television. It's not reality because it's not my reality. So until we open ourselves up to other people's realities, we wouldn't know what stories aren't being told. The other thing that I want to touch on is that as we as peace builders will never ever hear those stories unless we make ourselves vulnerable, because there's strength in vulnerability. You come as a peace builder into a community and you are put on a pedestal and you're elevated. How can you as a peace builder actually understand what I am going through until you tell your story of why you are a peace builder? Joe, your story, wow, I have never seen such vulnerability, and how you gather momentum and how you've used your vulnerability to create peace in this world. And I think the more we become vulnerable as peace builders, the more we will uncover the stories that are untold. I think that's just my opinion.
Thank you.
I think to take it away from the privilege and being in a privilege, I think we need to be real. I think we need to go with the micro and not the macro. Look in our own communities and our spheres of influence in places. I mean, some of us do it through organizations like Rotary and other entities, and being part of a like for example, I mean, just yesterday in my club, we talked about, we need to have real dialogue with the community, invite the community to talk about slavery and reparation, and that's, I mean, this is Rotary. Some other Rotary club will probably flip when they hear this, but at the same time, it's really, so yes, are we going to fix the problem or save the world from it? But I think we need to look at our sphere of influence and be real and not get overwhelmed, because that had been my problem throughout my life, that I feel like the how should I say, it really, like, I want the impact to be national, international, and it was localized. And I'm thinking, how can we take this to other? Well, you're 1, 2, 3, 10 people, but I think not to diminish the work that we do, and really feel into that. So, and I think people like us need to be more plugged in communities. And I think many times we do get into a bit of an ivory tower kind of thing, and think we are, we have it and we know what we're doing. And I'm going sometimes to go to the places that they may not even invite us, and invite ourselves to go. And that's the biggest part for me, is to be able to be vulnerable enough to go to communities that I have done that in the past. It was not very pleasant. I was cursed at, till I start speaking. And then you talk about in your question before the transformation. And transformation happened for me and them. But it taking risks and being vulnerable, and it's really risky. Sometimes violence and people want it's, so I think sometimes inviting ourselves to those places that not, and if we can do that, I think we'll gain more credibility. I think we'll have more impact, and I think we'll be less shy. and because those other voices in this day and age, they are way louder, and as they say, they have the pulpit, for lack of a better term. They have the microphone, and people like us are on the sidelines. That's the truth. And it's hurtful. It's not, it's sometimes, I want to say, be depressing at the end of devastating, but it's like it was, yeah. I think it's just, again, to be more in tune with our communities and connected to it, and say, let's do some of this work in the smallest places possible, and hopefully would impact the larger community. That
Thanks, this guy.
thank you.
Just adding a little bit to the great question. You know, I've often thought that if Patrick McGee had been listened to, you know, he would have changed his life. At 10, he didn't want to grow up and be a terrorist. He had his own dreams, and there could have been interventions. And I think that's true of everyone who is violent. So the voices that for me need to be listened to are those who, before they become violent. But I remember when we had the riots here in England, in the UK last summer, I felt so angry with the people who were destroying mosques and burning down refugee centres, because my friends were terrified. The fear was awful. And I felt so self-righteous and angry and didn't want to hear those stories. And I recognised in me that that's what I needed to heal, that part of me that wasn't open to hearing them. And only today, so I committed to hearing those stories. Only today I've been asked to work with a senior policeman who's working on hate crime, to work with offenders, you know, and I will be meeting some of those people. So for me, it's about changing myself, always change myself, because I need to be able to open up to some of the stories that I don't want to hear, you know, and then from there, create the safe spaces. So I believe it always starts with ourselves, and in our communities, there'll always be people around us whose stories aren't being heard. I know some of the young people I work with in school, that the chances are their stories being heard by me meant that they did have an alternative route to dealing with their own grievances. Can't prove this, but I'm sure that listening and that validating of their experience. So I believe it starts with ourselves.
Thank you.
We have a couple of questions from people. We have one on Nabil, you mentioned 80% preparation. So how does one prepare?
I think it is really critical to spend time with, quote unquote, the parties ahead of time before you bring them together. I think in terms of, and here's the biggest part for me, are they able to articulate their stories in a manner that is actually understandable? So many people, you know, I mean, it's a skill. I don't talk about privilege. It's a skill to be able to do that. And I have been in places where people didn't have the language, didn't have the words to use, and the other side overwhelmed them. They were very, you know, like, so to me, even spending time with them to talk, let's talk about your story. Let's talk about your experience. Let's talk and ask them more questions. Can you clarify this more? So when they come in, they have a way to articulate it. It's more of a balanced versus somebody who is extremely verbose and somebody who has not very little. So I think that's one. The other one about the whole idea of ground rules about listening and not judging and not jumping to conclusion and not interrupting. Those basic things we always do in this stuff, just to say to me, here's the ground rules. Mine, for example, you know, no violence, no standing up abruptly, ask for permission to leave. I'm being serious. Ask for permission to leave the room if you have to go for bio break, whatever it is. It's when you do these kind of facilities, group processes, you can't just let it, because again, for me, it's because I fell on my face before, and I have to tell myself what happened. And in so many ways, I think, and then talk about safety. Have done places and said, because, you know, I walked in and said to people, when you come in, no weapons. And we laugh at this. It's actually, people came to the initial meet with weapons. I'm talking guns on their side. And I said, no, this is a gun-free, knife-free zone. So, you know, please don't do that. And use of language too. You know, I think sometimes you want people to be free to speak, but at the same time, if you can, you know, if you use, I did some work in Northern Ireland, and unfortunately they referred to each other not in the kindest words, you know, like it's not saying, well, you know, my friend's on the other side, and they'll throw a slur on them. And I think, no, that does not going to help us here. So all of that, literally, you have to do some of that and just refocus again. Tell us your story, what happened to you, the impact on you, the impact on your community, the impact on your family, and how do you feel about it? You know, and I think kind of get people to go there. That to me, so there is a quote unquote technical check the box thing, and then there is really the authenticity. Help people come across as authentic as they can be in a situation. Between the two of them, there's a and again, I always remind people, this is a process, not an event. So many of us do these things, and we in Rotary are as guilty as anybody on this. We put an event together, we do this, and we expect magic to happen. And I'm thinking, it's a process. It's not an event. It's a multiple event. And, you know, Joe talked about 24 years. I mean, think of that, what it takes. And still there's, you know, you have to reflect on struggles and issues and stuff. So I think just to be very mindful, preparation is really key, to prepare the context, the space, and where do you have it? As always, we make assumptions about where to have it, you know, and how the setup of the room is. I always think of these things, like down to colors, what's on the wall, anything, you know, and I'm very conscious of stuff in here. For example, I have this picture. This is Palestinian refugees taken by a United Nations employee in, I think in 48 or whatever. It was long time ago. But I'm very conscious when I do certain things, I actually have to blur it. I don't want it to be there, because what's the context? So I'm very aware of these things. If I'm facilitating things between Israelis and Palestinians, I don't have this in the background because it's not appropriate. And I'm not saying it's wrong, but it's just like to say, oh, you're gonna, you know, so you have to be very mindful what's around you, what's the surrounding and the context by which you have that. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Nabil. And being conscious of the context as well as the context you bring, and Joe touched on our own trauma and being aware of what our own trauma is bringing into the room when we're doing this kind of work as well. Someone asked about opportunities for dialogue and mentioned that they use food to solicit stories. And I think there's a lot of examples of that to be true. I know there's a peace builder in Australia, Elaine Prattley, who does Peace Kitchen, and she brings people from different communities together around food. And I think that's just, I mean, breaking bread. We've mentioned that around the table today a couple of times. The last,
I have a food example.
yeah, sorry, Karen. No, go ahead.
I have a food example if you'd like to hear it. But
sure, yeah.
it kind of touches on the preparation thing, but it was one example is right here in where I live in Johnson City, Tennessee, and it was 2016, and there was the first Black Lives Matter rally taking place. That was going to happen on a Friday or a Saturday, I think it was. But there was a lot of tensions around, you know, from different people, and the mayor at the time was a conservative Christian, and he was like, what is all this going on? What is all these things happening? And I thought, well, he's a friend of mine. So I reached out to the mayor and I said, well, would you like to meet the activists and learn and find out? And so he goes, okay, but you come to my house. And then I invited the activists to come as well. They're organizing a rally. And they came to my house. I asked them if they could take their shoes off because you're now entering an Indian home. And I cooked curry. I cooked a masala traditional dish that my mother taught me. And I said, before we talk politics, we're all going to break bread. Now, the bread was roti because it's Indian bread, right? But none of them had had a curry before, right? But that kind of just it broke away, it kind of helped to introduce a shared experience. African-American clergyman came as well. And I said, would you say grace for all of us, even though I'm going to say grace? And it broke down an experience where we could now get into a story circle and come to a sort of an understanding of what these things meant. And what ended up actually happening was a little bit of collaboration. The rally went ahead, but the mayor decided, you know what? I'm going to attend, but I'm also going to get the police to protect you from the white supremacist rallies that were coming to agitate. And the Republican mayor said, I'll do that because I think you have the right to do what you're doing. So it was a small little thing, but it was kind of using a foodways process to get that story circle dialogue going. So that's just an example.
The last question, unless any four of you have a burning question for each other, is what competencies do we need to be a peace builder? And I think you've touched on a lot of it already, and that capacity for listening and thinking before you act, that vulnerability, that recognizing your own vulnerabilities, the curiosity, the authenticity.
I think it's about unpacking what it means to you as well. It's a spectrum. Peace building is very different. Rotary might, for example, likes to take an approach that is non-political, but peace building, you have to be engaged in politics because that's where the things exist, right? So it's also about, what does justice mean for you? What does human rights mean for you? What does the protection and preservation of DEI work mean to you? If you don't engage in that, people say you're being political, but isn't multiculturalism important? Isn't everyone's story important? So I think it also means how far are you willing to go to push the boundaries of what it means to be a peace builder and do the work that isn't sexy, isn't cool, and to maybe even be isolated from your community.
Yeah, interesting.
You're really willing to be.
Susan, if I may,
Yeah.
I'm probably one of the least qualified peace builders on this panel. I'm not a peace fellow. I haven't got the accolades that you do, and I don't move in the circles you do and work on peace building at the level that you do. I'm an average person. And what I've learned is you need to be vulnerable, and we've mentioned that. And you need to, and Joe touched on that, peace building starts with you, okay? And if you start practicing that in your immediate social circle, your immediate home, your work environment, your Rotary environment, it is amazing how the opportunities present itself for you to be involved in bigger aspects of peace building. Okay, so if I had not put myself out there to say I want to actively work in peace building, I would not even be on this panel, let alone anything else. So peace building starts with you. It starts with your vulnerability. It starts with dealing with your unconscious bias, getting rid of that unconscious bias, getting people to talk to you, getting that respect, that understanding. And as Rotarians, for any of the Rotarians on this call, we have got so many resources that can skill us in peace building. There's conflict resolution. There is dealing with unconscious bias. There's so much that we can invest in ourselves. And I think if I've got to leave a lasting comment, is invest in yourself to become better at peace building, and you will create the opportunities. Those opportunities will actually come to you. And every one of us are peace builders. We just need to unlock that potential and put ourselves in those positions where we can actually contribute to sustainable peace. And I think as an average person, that would be what I would like to leave with everybody.
You're no average person, Grace.
Thanks, Grace. And I hope if you're average, I'm average. So I have not been ignoring you, Peter. I just didn't see your hand up. So I'm going to get to you. Before I do, I want to say in response to this question that I truly believe in everyday peace building. And Elise Boulding said, every time you meet somebody, you have an opportunity for peace or conflict, because everybody is different than you. So get curious, listen, think, and act before you respond to new people who cross your path, and you'll be a peace builder. Peter, you had a question.
Yes. Yes, good evening all. I need conflict resolution in my home because I've actually forgotten to make dinner. As I have been in such awe with this panel discussion. I was invited by my DGN to listen in, but I can't just listen in. The stories that I've heard, and I'm not picking anybody out, and I have messaged her, Joe, you are an absolute inspiration to me. Kieran, your story was, I was almost brought to tears. And I'm a motivational and inspirational speaker in South Africa. And this, as I'm saying it, I'm getting goosebumps, has been worth more than any university could ever have taught me, more than any leader could have taught me, by listening to this. And I'm going to take these discussions into my talks, with all due respect to everybody, no names, no pactuals, but listen, think, and act is probably the most valuable lesson I've learned today. And for everybody in this panel, I honestly and truly thank you for the opportunity, and may you all be blessed.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Peter. It's a wonderful community of peace builders.
Mm-hmm.
It's global, and it's all of us, as we just said. It's everyone can be one. And if I'm going to go around just for final comments. We have 5 more minutes, and I could summarize it all, but I don't think I need to do that. I think I need to just thank you all so much for being here, for being part of my journey with the book. And it has inspired me to have further panel discussions. There's so many things to be talked about with all of the people that I've gotten to meet. I did notice just now that Victor has his hands up, so maybe I'll give Victor a word, and then maybe we can go around with just some last comments from everybody. Victor.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm Victor Gapuli from Liberia, and the peace builder from Euphrates Institute. Also with URI, and also with I've been with Rotary, but I'm not an alumni of Rotary. However, it's a pleasure and opportunity to be here, and Rotary have been one of the biggest peace building institutions that have been happy around the world, which we all appreciate. I listened to the conversation, and what we find ourselves now in a global society, the world is shaking on the basis where there are a lot of things happening on the basis that the world is dividing. All of them are building the world, which all of us were anticipating for the world to be a better place. But we see that there are different things taking place, for which we, the peace builder, now we have to be on alert to be able to do our best. Because if we don't do what we should have done, I think that the world will go on the contrary. For our country here, what we really are experiencing is that the peace building civil society is very weak. When the civil society is weak, you see that government get more power. And that is what's been happening. So the civil society around the world need to come together to strengthen their capacity to be able to really hold government accountable. Other than that, we will lose everything that we have built. We will lose everything that we work for. So there's a time now for all to get together, because what we have been appreciating the United States of America for a very long time, to be specific in terms of policing the war, standing in defense of humanity, and now those support that were given to protect human rights have been ruled out. And then we're looking at it's a dangerous path for us and for the whole global community. But the only thing we can do now is to strengthen the civil society, for the civil society to be very strong, to hold government accountable for us, to know the evil, which is important, which is something that we're really looking at. And we believe that the Rotary, being one of the largest peace building organizations, we consider it to strengthen its capacity so that we can move forward. It's a pleasure talking to you all, and I hope that we work together for the development of the world. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Victor, for your comments. And yes, let's all work together. Yes. I realize that there's other conversations I want to have, and we have 1 minute left. So I'm wondering, Leanne or Jennifer, if there is the capacity to continue the conversation somewhere online or anything, or whether people just want to, I put my website on the chat. You can always send me messages there and we can keep the conversation going. So I'm sorry we can't get to anybody else. I think I respect people's time, and we're at 5:30 here. So 1:30 there, and I don't know what time it is everywhere else in the world. But, so can I give everyone on the panel 30 more seconds just to say something? All right. Thank you.
Who do you want?
Yeah, Karen.
Okay, I don't know. I start talking and I'm like, I agree with everything that Victor said. The world is in trouble, and I think we have to pay attention to it. I don't think we can sit on the fence. We have to take a side. We either support universal human rights, or we support a world that's going to be destroying our humanity. So I really do believe international collaboration is core, and we have to stand up for things that causes and people that we care about. We have to remember that stories impact our world every day, from the GDP to the Dow Jones. But what if that indicator could be world peace? We have to reach out to our friends. And Nabil talked about the micro, really, really important. But the micro is also connected to the macro. What happens in our neighborhoods, on our front porches, on our kitchen tables, impacts the macro, and vice versa. We have to talk about it. We have to stand up for universal human rights for all people, because people are dying right now because of some of the decisions being made in my country, United States, and I'm ashamed of it. So I hope that as Rotarians, as peace activists, or whoever we are, we stand up to it, because the world is one people, and we have to stand for that one people. We are one human race, and that is worth fighting for.
Thank you, Karen. Before we go to Grace, I just want to, in the chat, there's a survey to fill out, if people could have a look at that. Okay, Grace.
Yeah, I think one thing I'd like to leave with you is to invest in yourself and educate yourself on how to become an active peace builder. And every one of us are peace builders, like I mentioned, and Joe's mentioned, and you bring it into your everyday life. But start investing in yourself and start joining conversations like this. because this is how you get the platform to actually make a difference. This is how you get the platform and the knowledge and the guidance on how you take the conversation further, because we are not all skilled and operating at a level where we think we can make change. But every one of us, if we collectively work towards positive peace building in our own homes, in our own communities, in our own countries, we are making a difference. So invest in yourself and put yourself out there, because that's the only way you're going to bring about change.
Thanks, Grace. Nabil, last words.
I really, first I want to acknowledge ACIC, because I think, well, we have different ACICs type organization we need to hook up with, because without them, this would have happened. People like Susan, who championed these things, have worked for a long time, for over the last year or more, to put something together to get these voices together. So these are all models for me. This is not just in, and I think, the old adage, they say, think globally, act locally. And I think that, building on Kieran and what Grace said, work on the individual first and the micro with the macro, because we do matter. And I think I want to leave us with this. I don't get emotional, but we do matter. We do matter. And I think let's not lose sight of that. And sometimes when you have a candle lit in a dark place, it can really expose so many things. We don't need to have a huge flashlight, just candles. And I think let's keep thinking that way and build that and connect with organizations and entities and people who are leading this, and support them and engage them. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nabil. Joe.
Wow. The story I'm hearing today from everyone is of change, is of transformation, is of love. And to me, believing that we can create a more just, a world full of equity where people's needs are met, is important to cultivate my sense of hope. And this has done that today. To me, it's one of the highest forms of non-violence, is to believe in humanity, that as change makers, as peace builders, we have the capacity not just to destroy, but also to rebuild. And the power of love is what I've been feeling from everyone today. And I feel very blessed, very privileged. So thank you for having me today.
Thank you. And I don't think I can follow those words any better, because I also feel very blessed. And I put this book out to bring hope. And so thank you for reflecting on that.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you.
Leanne, did you want to sign out, or do we?
Thanks, Susan. I think you folks have captured this beautifully. I was just brought on to make a final housekeeping note about the survey that Rashi has linked to in the chat, and to check out ACIC's website for the IDW events still happening today and tomorrow. And Susan, I believe it's further up in the chat now, but you've got your website for the anthology as well. Could you just say it again?
It's Global Voices for Peace, and the 4 is the number 4.ca. And earlier today, ACIC interviewed me, and that will also be on the website, and it's sort of a precursor to this panel. So everybody should visit that. Thank you so much for the opportunity, ACIC, and thank you, Nabil, for acknowledging that. And thank you to all of my newfound friends around the table.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
And everyone for attending.
Great. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Thanks a lot.